AVAIYA has changed my life.
AVAIYA has made me the woman I am today.
AVAIYA is my home.
AVAIYA is personal freedom.
AVAIYA is the reason my life continuously improves.
Let everyone in your life know about AVAIYA.
Everyone needs to know about this amazing company.
Thank you, AVAIYA, for appearing in my inbox.
What Ike Allen and Andy Anderson have created at AVAIYA is what the world needs.
Hello, AVAIYA family. I'm Andy Anderson. My partner, Ike Allen, and I are teachers, mentors, and the co-owners of AVAIYA University. AVAIYA is the creator of over 1,000 books, films, courses, teachings, and other supportive resources. Thank you, as always, for joining us. Our fellow teacher, Susan Anderson, is with us today to talk about childhood trauma and abandonment. Susan is an expert and author on how to overcome abandonment and its aftermath of self-sabotaging patterns. She reaches out through her websites, workshops, and media to share her methods of abandonment recovery with victims of the trauma of abandonment, heartbreak, and loss around the world. Her groundbreaking program is the product of over 30 years of research and clinical practice. Welcome back to AVAIYA, Susan.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, so happy to have you back. And I'm so excited we get to have another conversation around abandonment today, as it is definitely something that a lot of people experienced as children. And I'm curious, how in your work do you see abandonment during childhood as an actual childhood trauma, a very traumatic event?
Well, you hear a lot about complex post-traumatic stress disorder, CPTSD. I don't know if you
Yes.
see that, but and what that is really is post-traumatic stress disorder of abandonment, because we all have a level of trauma because we were all born. We all were in the womb, and then we were all comfortable and perfect, and then thrust out into the cold. And the contrast between the connection and the disconnection was something our emotional brains were developed enough to record. So even as infants, we are accumulating sensations of disconnection, which is uncomfortable, and then connection, because then we're picked up and cuddled, and then we're put back in the crib. So there's connection, disconnection. We have that sequence, and we develop a fear of disconnection or an aversion and a love of connection. And we keep that our whole lives. And it's deep, 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 deep. So even if we have the idyllic childhood as we go through childhood, all the disconnections, having to leave mommy to go to the first grade, all just even very normal, ordinary kinds of experiences feel very much along those very deep lines of the primal feeling. So it's very easy to collect a lot of trauma from childhood and abandonment. And it's really post-traumatic stress disorder of abandonment. It lays a foundation for all the rest of the traumas that we can have. And children have so many traumas just from having a feeling less than their friends, feeling their friends have more freedom than they do, or are better at something than they do. They have trauma from having a parent who's an alcoholic. And so they don't quite feel important and special with that parent, or they feel responsible as if they were better. Maybe their parent would not do that. So there are so many experiences in childhood. The experiences run the gamut.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm so glad that you mentioned things just like, yes, going to school for the first time, or what your parents go on a vacation and grandma's staying with you, or what any of those things can be little traumas that, little notches in the road. You mentioned that these kinds of traumas lay the foundation for the rest of our life, and perhaps traumas we can experience as an adult. How does that work?
Well, it's as if you have sort of a blueprint of trauma, because the original trauma is birth trauma, and it has to do with disconnection, and it's assuaged by connection. So that whole sequence of sort of like moving in the direction of connection and then having fears of disconnection. So even in later life, being raped, rape being such a severe trauma, the trauma is laid upon this original infrastructure of that trauma, because you're afraid of death, you're afraid of being killed, you feel that you're being destroyed, all those feelings are the feelings of disconnection, of separation, of discomfort. So no matter what the trauma is, a train accident with, a big crash, loud noises, lots of people screaming, all of these things are laid upon an infrastructure basically of having the wonderful comfort of the womb and being held and cuddled, to the feeling of discombobulation and where's the, what's going on? This is crazy. So it is an infrastructure. And so it is the original trauma. It's the granddaddy of all the traumas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you mentioned a little bit about different kinds of ways that we can have this abandonment trauma, right? Alcoholic parents or, what have you. What are some of like the most common things you see come up for adults now who experience like these abandonment traumas? Like what kinds of abandonment do you see?
Yeah. I mean, children of alcoholics definitely are a large group, and children who've been adopted and who become adults feel that have an unconscious feeling, but it becomes conscious with the work that we do, the abandonment work, have an unconscious feeling of somehow not counting, not being special enough to make our parent be a better parent, or to not have been left by our birth parent or whatever. But the kinds of experiences that adults have, they have when they go through an adult abandonment, a breakup, they have a very rough time getting through it. It takes a long time to get over it. It takes a long time to let go, or they have trouble finding a relationship, or they feel insecure within a relationship. And this sounds so mild to put it that way, but really in practice, starting a new relationship is like a roller coaster, because there's this terror of freaking out on the person and sabotaging the relationship. The insecurity becomes so intense, the stakes are so high, that then there's a terror of, oh no, I'm going to ruin it. I'm going to freak out and drive the person away. But there's also the feeling, the sort of the unresolved abandonment manifests in a feeling of not being able to reach your potential, that your self-esteem isn't high enough to compete with other people. You may have more talent, but they have a better self-esteem, and therefore they're able to move forward. But your low self-esteem and your insecurity and the abandonment fear makes you too inhibited. It makes you have performance anxiety around authority figures, or when you're auditioning for a play or something, and it interferes in your ability to really move forward in your life. So you're settling constantly for a job that doesn't really suit your talents, or a relationship that isn't really what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
These are just some of the scenarios that are very common. I mean, the biggest one though, the biggest scenario I would say that I find is the tendency to be attracted to the unavailable, which means that your marriage can go in the doldrums because you become sure of the person and you aren't able to feel passion, or you feel the insecurity because your partner is pulling away for that reason, or you're single and the only people who seem to be attractive to you are people who are hard to get. And once they become available, you start finding fault with them. Mm-hmm. You start noticing their table manners or their grammar or something like that, and you turn off. So that's a very common pattern of people who have childhood trauma.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering too, right? Like I'm thinking of, right, there's obviously the like physical abandonment, like the adoption, or the dad leaves or a parent dies, or what have you. What about like emotional abandonment? And maybe you had two parents and you grew up in like what occurred like a pretty decent childhood, but they maybe weren't there for you emotionally or couldn't be there for you emotionally. What kinds of repercussions does that have on a child that then becomes an adult?
Oh, there are so many of them. I mean, I have lists of these things. But one of them is moving a lot. You're a new kid on the block, so you're constantly disconnecting from a secure environment and entering the unknown and having to adjust. But having a parent who who you have to sort of take care of in order for them to give you what you need. Having a parent who could be borderline or narcissistic, or depressed, and you have to work to get the parent to sort of blow them up like a blow up doll so that they can become your parent. And sometimes you never even expect them to become your parent. You do all the work as the child. You have a real role reversal. That's very common. And another one that is a pretty common scenario is that you grow up in a family where there's secondary abandonment, meaning that the parent is going through grief, loss, or has gone through a heartbreak. You know, you mentioned the father leaves, let's say, stereotypic, very often mothers leave, but the father leaves. And the child feels the loss of the father and feels the low self-esteem as a result, because somehow if they were more special, or they counted more, they could have prevented their father from leaving. This is an unconscious assumption. But there's also the fact that the father leaving may make the mother feel abandoned, and the mother may be going through an abandonment crisis. So they're not only growing up with their own feelings about a parent leaving, but they are breathing the fumes all around them of their parents' feelings of abandonment. And when you see parents get divorced, you see a lot of this with kids. It's terrible on kids that they go through. You know, we all know that it's very rough on kids, but part of it is because kids will identify which parent feels more abandoned. And I've seen kids who will choose to live with a parent they think has been abandoned, even though they'd rather live with one of the other parents, but they feel so guilty and sad for the one who's been abandoned that they will make a sacrifice. I see this all the time. And so, you know, children experience so much abandonment directly from their own experiences. You know, they could have a learning disability and they feel they don't compete well in school, and the other kids do it better and they feel inadequate, and they feel the fear of abandonment, that they're not up to par and they'll be discarded. But they also, so that's one of the many direct abandonment scenarios, but there's also the stuff going on with the parents, what the parents are going through, that we are coping with our own losses, but also as children, but also what our parents are not being able to give us, and what we can sense that they're going through, and the sympathy and empathy that we have as children, we go through that with them.
Right. Yeah. Adding so much fuel to the fire. That's so interesting. I was thinking back to my own childhood, and my parents got divorced when I was 9, and oh yeah, my mom, it was like a classic, right? My dad, cheated on her and went to marry the woman and raise those kids, and that kind of scenario. And I look back at it and I never really thought about, right, like how much of her heartbreak and her struggle, right, me and my brother would have absorbed from that situation. So,
and until it's brought up in a workshop, people are not aware of that.
Yeah.
When you say it in a group of people, and you say, well, there's secondary abandonment if your mother was going through abandonment, many people identify, but it's not something written about or even consciously perceived. But boy, once you realize that you experienced secondhand, that you grew up breathing those fumes,
right?
Once you realize that, it really is, it's quite a realization.
Yeah, I'm having my own aha moment right here. So I'm imagining people watching or listening are also, right, like perhaps looking at that in like a way they never have. And I'm curious, right, since we're talking about like breakups and heartbreak, I do know in my own personal life, a lot of like past relationships that didn't work out, or like you mentioned, they can be just devastating for someone who has abandonment wounds. How do you think breakups compare to someone like grieving someone who's died?
Well, they overlap because loss is loss. They overlap a lot because when somebody abandons you, they're lost to you. I mean, when it's real over, they're lost to you, but they're not lost to their friends or family. So, you're in loss, but it's only your loss.
Right.
But when somebody dies, they're lost to many other people. So there's more of a community around the loss. But with abandonment, the element of failure and rejection is what makes it so difficult, because when you go through abandonment, there are 5 stages and they overlap with grief, but the shattering, withdrawal, internalizing, rage, and lifting, those happen with grief over death. But the internalizing phase, where you take the wound personally, we do it with death also. We blame ourselves or somehow feel that fate chose us for something sad and it's difficult. But when you've broken up the internalizing phase, the middle phase of the process, you really do blame yourself. I'm not lovable enough. I'm not enough. I wasn't able to make it work. I couldn't hold the person's love. I'm not attachment worthy, or I'm inadequate when it comes to maintaining a relationship, or I picked the wrong person. I'm just damaged. I'm broken. I don't know how to choose a person. All of these self-depreciating feelings inevitably happen as a result of rejection, abandonment, a broken relationship, which are not as intense with death, unless the death is a suicide. And then that internalizing phase can be pretty ferocious.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious, could you take us through the 5 stages of abandonment? You mentioned stages a bit ago.
Yeah.
What are those?
Okay. Children go through it too. It's SWIRL. That's the acronym: shattering, withdrawal, internalizing, rage, and lifting. And shattering is when you realize the connection is threatened. You're in the womb and you're about to lose you're in a relationship and you realize the connection is threatened. And withdrawal, you yearn for that security. You yearn for that person. You yearn for the job. You can go through this if you're fired, or, you lose a friend, or, the many things can trigger, a full-scale abandonment crisis. But you feel that you yearn for to reconnect with the object, and it's not available.
Right.
So it's the pining. And then in internalizing, you beat yourself up and you take your rage about being rejected out on yourself and inculcate a really severe depression, or it can be a really severe depression that can mimic a major depression and can confuse therapists into thinking that you really have a mental illness, a condition, when in fact you're going through a natural grieving process over abandonment. Then rage, the 4th stage, is when a part of you says, it's not all my fault. This isn't all because I'm inadequate. I'm fine. It's their fault, or, but rage, these stages overlap and you go through them over and over, of course. But when the rage, very often when we go through that agitated state, we're afraid to take our rage out directly on the person or the employer that fired us or the person who rejected us. And instead we get angry with our friends for saying stupid things like, just let go and move forward. And, the rage gets displaced very often. It's very hard to contain that kind of rage that comes from abandonment. And then there's lifting, and it lifts you out of the abandonment, maybe for an hour before going back into the cycle. Maybe you'll laugh at a joke, or you'll be loving some flowers that you see, or, you have moments when you lift out of it, but, until you're kind of done with the cycle, you go back into it. But lifting sounds so nice, but it really is something you have to know how to handle the feelings, so that when you lift, you have your feelings intact. Because what many people do is they suppress all the feelings. Are so horrible. They separate themselves from those feelings and they become callous and more distant, more detached. You've seen many people like this who have trouble loving again. And then it creates that pattern of being numb And the only emotion you can feel is insecurity, fear of abandonment. So you wind up chasing unavailable people for your next relationship, because that you can feel, that you at least can feel, the insecurity, the fear of abandonment, whereas mutual love becomes harder to feel. So it's so important to take your feelings with you, keep them all alive, all those feelings that woke up, because that will keep you able to feel all your feelings, including mutual love.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Because if we suppress, right, the so-called negative emotions, then we're also, right, not letting ourselves open up to the amazing experiences of excitement and joy and all of that. Yes, that is how it works.
Yeah.
I'm curious too, when we talk about loss, abandonment and loss, what might be some of the biological reasons that it can take so long for people to get over it, that it's so difficult? Like, what's going on biologically?
Well, it triggers a whole response from your amygdala, your emotional brain. It triggers a whole stress hormone response, which has a long-acting effect. Some of the stress hormones are quick, immediate adrenaline. You get a rush of stress, and those are short-acting stress hormones, but we have longer-acting stress hormones that keep us in a state of feeling miserable for a long time. And it really is a physiological state. And we can confuse it into feeling that we're weak, that we have, that we're being too excessive, that we're overreacting. Really, it's a biological process that we just have to kind of get our way through. There's lots of help as we go through it, but it is something we have to respect. And the amygdala, which is the seat of the emotional brain, which is the part of the brain responsible for recording our aversive kind of avoiding of, things that promote fear. That when we have experiences that have those emotions, we record them permanently, they're indelible. Whereas when we don't remember the details, that's the hippocampus, another part of the brain. We don't remember the details necessarily. We can have a complete memory blackout of events that happened in childhood or, but the part that we'll never forget is the emotional part. We don't have words for them. It's just a feeling that comes gushing out. So the emotions that are stimulated by adult abandonment are deeply ingrained. They are involuntary. When you feel insecure in a relationship, that's a deeply ingrained abandonment fear. It's not something you can rationalize. You can't just say, oh, that's ridiculous, and let me overcome that. You can overcome the way you react to it. That you have control over your behavior, but the feelings themselves are involuntary. They come unbidden because they're part of your emotional brain. They're etched in there. So there's a very strong biological part of your emotional responses to any kind of, threat of separation, any experience that makes you feel less than, that'll trigger fear of abandonment and shame. Mm-hmm. And any experience that makes you feel you're about to lose something, which also triggers shame because it makes you feel that if I were better, I wouldn't have to worry about losing it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So interesting. I mean, I think so many of us are getting this better understanding of neuroscience and like all of how much the brain has to do with so many things in our life. It's just crazy. I find it so fascinating to really dive into.
Well, it's very important to appreciate and respect the part of it that is ingrained, that is etched into the way our brain, the hardwiring of the brain, because then we stop beating ourselves up for having these powerful emotions. We can accept that this is a human biological process. We're not weak. It may have temporarily brought us to our knees, but we'll be okay eventually. We just have to get support and get through it. And of course, there's a lot of help in the program, but we just have to get through it. There will be sunshine again. But when we don't accept the sort of the biology of it, we're trying to change the unchangeable, and we're trying to squelch our feelings, and we're trying to, sort of give ourselves stories, to give ourselves excuses for feeling them, when in fact, we're just human, and these things hurt, and they echo back to childhood trauma.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's so key in the world of shame, like you just said, that we don't get trapped there, because then we're just beating ourselves up. And then there's this big
The
cycle.
shame is a huge part of it, because we have shame from the time that we were old enough to try to bring people to the bedside by cooing or crying or going, dad, dad, mom, and they don't come. And then we'd feel powerless and not enough. Of course, sometimes they do come and we feel powerful and omnipotent, but that's the origins of shame, come with our ability to control our environment or our lack of ability to control it. And we start building on that. We notice somebody is more popular than we are, and they have more friends to play with, or whatever it is. We keep building on the shame. We build on good feelings too. It isn't all bad. I mean, we're accumulating all kinds of feelings. But when we go through abandonment, the shame is tremendous, because we really feel unconsciously that we just aren't enough.
Mm-hmm.
We just aren't as good as other people. We just we're not valuable enough to keep the job or keep the friend or keep the lover. And it might be unconscious, but it is there. That shame is right there. And that's what makes it so painful and so personal.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And so what are some things that people can do to start recovering from this wound, this abandonment wound? What strategies, tools, things can people apply into their lives?
Well, there's a lot people can do. They have to know how to identify the feelings. Being able to accept your feelings and validate your own feelings is a very important part of it. I think I've already alluded to the fact that understanding the science and sort of surrendering and respecting, the kind of process that you're in is a very important step. But then there is also the fact that the modality for getting through a crisis, if it's a mild crisis or a major crisis, the modality is the moment. You develop skills to know how to get into the moment, even if it's just a few seconds at a time. That's one very important tool. And of course, I have tons of stuff on that. And there's a lot other people have on that. There are many gurus for that,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of support for that. And then there's also the use of your imagination, which is extremely important, because when you're going through a crisis, you have a dread, a sense of future that's become negative and fearful. Right. So you can't get rid of that. That's part of the apparatus, but you can add positive images to that so that you have more positive images than negative. You can begin to build those in. And I have an exercise which I call Dream House, which works on that. And it helps you to put these positive future images in your mind, just as a way of having an alternative to the dread that you're feeling. So it really helps to balance it. And then there's an exercise there are 5 exercises, 5 main ones, for separating your emotions from your thinking mind. And it's big U to little u, and writing a dialogue that actually helps you create self-love, not just by saying pretty words and sweet talking to little you, but taking baby steps, action steps for doing things for little you. So you give love to yourself, and words are cheap. You do things to give love for yourself. It's very powerful exercise, life-changing exercise. And then there's the outer child, which is the self-sabotaging part, which you target. And by targeting, you can bring awareness of your outer child into this process of giving love to yourself, and doing it in such a way that you bypass the outer child's self-indulgent, habit-formed, outer child is into procrastination. And that's one of its many behaviors. And so you have to work with the emotions that feed that tendency of procrastination, so that your outer child is not sabotaging everything you're trying to do. That's a very powerful exercise. And then there is having a sense of a 5-point action plan for going into your future, where you really start to define where you're going, what your goals are, so that you can have a real sense of direction, even while you're not exactly sure how today is going to be. You live in a day-tight compartment and make today as good as possible, but you're not exactly sure how it all is going to happen. But you have faith that you have a plan, and that if you follow your program, yes, you will get there. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the tool set. There are many other tools as well. Mm-hmm. But those are the main exercises.
Gotcha. Yeah. Thank you. I love all those, especially, right, the things that we can do with the outer child, right? That what other things besides procrastination does our outer child do to self-sabotage us?
Oh, well, the outer child is the part that wants immediate gratification. So the outer child doesn't want to delay gratification to achieve a long-range goal. But when we're coming through abandonment and we're looking to turn abandonment into an opportunity for very profound growth, well, we need to delay gratification in a lot of ways. So the things that outer child does that are self-gratifying, procrastination feels great because then you don't have to do it yet. Avoidance, we won't even bother finishing the PhD. It's too much work, and then drinking. And that's probably one of the biggest ones. And overeating, because instant gratification. And of course, if we have a goal of fitness and we overeat, we're violating our goal. But outer child has all these relationship issues where it wants to take a new person as an emotional hostage so that they have to meet all of our needs. And then outer child has all these unrealistic expectations that set up conflict and create tension in the relationship. So outer child is sort of a hog, wants instant gratification, balks at delaying gratification. Outer child is always fighting against my exercises because the exercises promote change, and outer child doesn't want to change. Outer child likes, what it does. It likes lounging around and watching TV instead of going to the gym. It prefers not. We might want to clean out the garage, but outer child doesn't feel like it.
Right.
So outer child doesn't want to change and doesn't want to have to do all that stuff. So we have sort of an opponent to the growth, but we have to learn to make peace with it and work with it, make it work for us.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Be aware of that part of us. And yeah, I love it. Thank you. I appreciate you going through some other characteristics of that outer child. I think that's super interesting for all of us to take in and, kind of relate to in our own personal life. So since we're running low on time, Susan, I want to make sure you have a chance to talk about how people can learn more about you. And we have a link below, everyone, to Susan's website. I know you have your books there and a bunch of other resources. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I make the program available through my website. Has a lot of information on it. My books give my workshop, my program. It guides people. Each of the books guide people through the program in different ways. And then my workshops guide people through the program, even if it's a 1-day workshop or even a 3-hour workshop or a 6-day workshop. It's guiding people through the exercises. Of course, the longer the workshop, the more depth we can get into. And I run online workshops. And then I have videotapes where you can download the 5 exercises and practice them at home.
Great.
So I try to make the work available in every possible modality. And my website is a good way to find out about all of that.
Great. Awesome. And yeah, the link for that, your website is below. So you guys can go explore that and check out your books and workshops and exercises and all sorts of stuff. So thank you so much for all of that. Do you have any last insights before we wrap up?
Well, the thing that I always try to say to people who are looking for change is that don't expect perfection, because perfection doesn't really count. If you have something holding you back, let's say it's being a people pleaser. If you're a people pleaser and that kind of ruins everything because you're always putting other people first, you don't have to change it perfectly. If you just reduce it a little bit, think more of yourself, just a little bit, that little bit, you could still be a people pleaser, but just a little bit might make the difference. That makes the difference. I feel like I'm repeating myself because I love to point this out to people, because they're all set to get rid of people pleasing or stop being codependent. And we might not be able to get rid of these traits, but we can reduce them just enough to make a difference in our lives. We don't have to go around perfect, functioning in all areas. We can have a wonderful life full of complexity, flaws, and all kinds of things.
I love that. Thank you. I appreciate that perfectionistic note at the end there, because absolutely, we're not going to just get rid of everything and live in some fairy tale land, right? We can
make a lot of change, but we can do it by not being perfectionistic about it.
I love it. Thank you so much for doing this again.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's so great to connect with you, Susan, and I appreciate you and all your work. And AVAIYA students who are watching or listening, thanks for showing up for yourself today and being willing to dive into this conversation. And we will see you all again very soon. Take care. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this latest class with Susan Anderson. She was back with us today to talk about childhood trauma and the abandonment wound. I always enjoy my conversations with Susan. She is such an expert in this topic of abandonment, and we really dove deep into why it is that this abandonment wound is so traumatic for us as children, and how it can really impact our relationships and our life and our happiness in general as adults. One of the big take-home messages, I think, was just talking about the biological reasons that abandonment, loss, grief is so difficult for us, that it can take us so long to get over. And I think my favorite part of this conversation is, right, don't try to change the unchangeable, right? Our brains work in a certain way, and that is our biology. Can we change? Are our brains plastic? Yes. Can we do things to rewire them? Yes. But we have some default ways that our brains work, and they are biologically a certain way. And I think recognizing that allows us to respect our brains for what they're trying to accomplish, right? And keeping us safe and all of those kinds of things. And it really tones down, I think, the shame, the beating ourselves up for, oh my gosh, why did I start feeling that way when he said X, as opposed to just being so frustrated with ourselves about it and just giving ourselves a break and recognizing, okay, that's my brain is doing something to keep me safe, but then I can use my, the other parts of me to recognize that I don't want to react in certain ways. And I can change that. I can be responsible for not reacting, or reacting in a more responsible way to whatever's coming to me. So I think that's just so important for all of us to recognize and remember. And then the other thing I wanted to make a quick note of was the secondary abandonment conversation. That's very profound. So we talked about how if you grew up and one of your parents or caregivers had their own abandonment they were going through, had their own breakup, had their own divorce, had their own, maybe they lost their spouse, your other parent, maybe they died. So, right, this is something that they were going through. You were going through your own experience as a child, and maybe not getting your needs met from that parent, because they too were going through their own abandonment. So what kinds of things did you pick up on, and emotions and feelings and all sorts of things did you pick up on and really make into your own experience? So I think that was a great thing to think about in your own journey, if that is something that you struggled with in your own childhood trauma. So thank you so much for joining us, everyone. We will see you again soon. Take care.
AVAIYA has changed my life.
AVAIYA has made me the woman I am today.
AVAIYA is my home.
AVAIYA is personal freedom.
AVAIYA is the reason my life continuously improves.
Let everyone in your life know about AVAIYA.
Everyone needs to know about this amazing company.
Thank you, AVAIYA, for appearing in my inbox.
What Ike Allen and Andy Anderson have created at AVAIYA is what the world needs.